The small, cozy restaurant was buzzing with the usual lunchtime crowd. The smell of freshly cooked food filled the air, and the clinking of plates mixed with cheerful chatter. In one corner, an elderly woman sat alone at a small table. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the menu, her eyes scanning it carefully. She wore a simple dress and a warm smile, though her posture showed the weariness of age. A young waiter, barely in his 20s, walked over to her table. His apron was slightly wrinkled, and his expression was more impatient than polite. He had been working long hours and was tired, but that was no excuse for what was about to happen. "Ready to order?" he asked, his tone flat, not even bothering to smile. The old woman looked up, her gentle eyes meeting his. "Yes, dear. Could I please have the vegetable soup and a slice of bread?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she didn't want to trouble him. The waiter sighed loudly, rolling his eyes. "That's it? Just soup and bread? You're taking up a whole table for that?" His words were sharp, meant to sting. A few nearby customers glanced over, frowning at his rudeness. The old woman's smile faltered, but she kept her voice calm. "I'm not very hungry, dear. Just something light." The waiter scoffed. "You know, we have a minimum charge for tables. If you're not ordering enough, maybe you should sit at the counter." The woman's face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to speak but closed it again, not wanting to cause a scene. Slowly, she reached for her purse, her hands shaking a little more now. Just then, the restaurant's front door swung open. A tall, well-dressed man in his 40s walked in, his sharp eyes scanning the room. His expression was calm, but there was something about him that commanded attention. The staff immediately straightened up, recognizing him instantly. The rude waiter, however, was too busy being dismissive to notice. "Look, lady, if you can't afford a proper meal, maybe you should go somewhere else," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for her to hear. The old woman's eyes filled with hurt, but before she could respond, the well-dressed man reached her table. His face darkened as he took in the scene. "Mom," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. The waiter froze. His stomach dropped as the realization hit him like a punch. This sweet, humble old woman was the mother of the man who owned the entire restaurant. And he had just insulted her in front of everyone. The restaurant fell silent for a brief moment. The owner's voice had been quiet but firm, and the few customers who had overheard the exchange stopped eating, their eyes darting between the waiter, the elderly woman, and the man standing beside her. The waiter's face turned pale. His mouth went dry, and his fingers tightened around his notepad. He had seen the owner before, usually in meetings with the managers, but never this close. And never while insulting his own mother. The old woman looked up at her son, her eyes softening. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, as if nothing had happened. "I was just ordering some soup." The owner's jaw clenched. He had heard enough. He turned to the waiter, his voice dangerously calm. "What's your name?" The waiter swallowed hard. I'm," he fumbled, his confidence shattered. One of the other servers, a young woman with wide eyes, whispered from behind the counter, "His name's Daniel." The owner didn't take his eyes off him. "Daniel. Did you just tell my mother she shouldn't be sitting here?" Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to make excuses, but the words wouldn't come. The entire restaurant was watching. The old woman reached out and gently touched her son's arm. "It's all right, dear. He didn't mean any harm." The owner looked down at her, his expression softening for just a second before turning back to Daniel. "You're lucky she's kinder than I am." He took a deep breath, keeping his voice low but firm. "Go wait in the office. We'll talk in a minute." Daniel nodded quickly, his hands shaking as he set down the notepad and hurried away. The whispers started almost immediately, customers murmuring to each other, some shaking their heads in disapproval. The owner pulled out a chair and sat beside his mother. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" he asked, his voice much gentler now. She smiled faintly. "I didn't want to bother you at work. I just wanted a quiet lunch." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, you're never a bother. You know that." She patted his hand. "I know, son. But you're always so busy. I didn't want to interrupt." Meanwhile, in the back office, Daniel paced nervously. His mind raced with thoughts of what would happen next. Would he be fired on the spot? Would the owner make a scene in front of everyone? He had heard stories about how ruthless the man could be when it came to his business, and his family. A few minutes later, the door opened. The owner stepped inside, closing it behind him. His expression was unreadable. Daniel immediately stood up straight. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she was your mother. I was just..." "Just what?" the owner interrupted. "Rude to an elderly woman because she didn't order enough?" Daniel's shoulders slumped. There was no excuse. The owner studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "How long have you worked here?" 3 months, Daniel mumbled. "And in 3 months, you still haven't learned basic respect?" The owner's voice wasn't raised, but the disappointment in it cut deeper than anger. Daniel looked down, shame burning in his chest. The owner exhaled slowly. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back out there, apologize to my mother, properly, and then you're going to finish your shift. After that, we'll discuss whether you still have a job here." Daniel's head snapped up. He had expected to be fired immediately. "You're giving me another chance?" The owner's gaze hardened. "Not for you. For her. Because she's the one who asked me to." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The owner turned to leave but paused at the door. "And Daniel? If you ever disrespect a customer, any customer, like that again, you won't just lose this job. You'll regret it." With that, he walked out, leaving Daniel standing there, his heart pounding. Daniel stood frozen in the office for a long moment, his stomach twisting with shame. He had never been spoken to like that before, not by a teacher, not by a boss, not even by his own parents. The owner's words echoed in his mind, "You're lucky she's kinder than I am." Taking a shaky breath, he straightened his apron and stepped back into the dining area. The restaurant was quieter now, the usual lunchtime chatter replaced by hushed whispers and sideways glances. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow him as he walked toward the table where the owner and his mother sat. The old woman was sipping a cup of tea, her hands steady now. Her son sat beside her, his expression unreadable. Daniel stopped in front of them, his throat tight. "Ma'am," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry for how I spoke to you earlier. It was disrespectful, and there's no excuse for it." The woman set down her cup and looked up at him. Instead of anger, her eyes held something softer, something that made the shame in Daniel's chest burn even hotter. "It's all right, young man," she said gently. "We all have bad days." Daniel blinked. That was it? No scolding, no lecture. Just forgiveness? The owner watched him closely, arms crossed. "My mother might be willing to let it go, but I'm not. You're on probation. One more mistake, and you're done." Daniel nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I understand." The owner stood, adjusting his jacket. "Good. Now get back to work." As Daniel turned away, he caught the glances of the other servers, some sympathetic, others smug. One of the cooks shook his head in disapproval. The weight of their judgment pressed down on him as he grabbed a tray and forced himself to keep moving. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. Daniel moved mechanically, taking orders, refilling drinks, avoiding eye contact. Every time he passed the old woman's table, his chest tightened. She never once glared at him or made him feel worse. Instead, she smiled kindly at the other servers and even thanked them when they brought her extra bread without her asking. Near the end of her meal, she motioned for Daniel to come over. His hands trembled as he approached. "Yes, ma'am." She reached into her small handbag and pulled out a folded photograph. "I wanted to show you something," she said, sliding it across the table. Curious, Daniel picked it up. It was an old, faded picture of a young woman in a waitress uniform, balancing a tray of food with a bright smile. "That was me," the old woman said. 50 years ago. I worked at a diner just like this one." Daniel stared at the photo, then back at her. He hadn't expected that. She continued, her voice warm. "I know how hard this job can be. Long hours, difficult customers, feet that ache by the end of the day." She chuckled softly. "But kindness costs nothing. And sometimes, the people who seem unimportant are the ones who deserve it the most." Daniel didn't know what to say. His throat felt thick. The owner returned just then, glancing between them. "Everything all right?" His mother nodded. "Just sharing an old memory." She took the photo back, tucking it carefully into her bag. As she stood to leave, she patted Daniel's arm. "Remember what I said, young man. Everyone deserves respect." Daniel could only nod, watching as her son helped her toward the door. That night, as Daniel cleaned the last tables, one of the older servers, a woman who had worked at the restaurant for years, stopped beside him. "You got off easy," she said quietly. "That woman? She's the reason this place even exists. Her son opened it in her honor. She spent her whole life working in restaurants to put him through school." Daniel froze, the rag in his hand dripping onto the floor. The server gave him a knowing look. "Think about that next time you judge someone by their order." And with that, she walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the empty dining room, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. The next morning, the restaurant buzzed with tension before the doors even opened. Word had spread quickly among the staff about what had happened, how Daniel had insulted the owner's mother, how she had forgiven him, and how close he had come to losing his job. As Daniel walked in, the chatter in the break room died down. A few co-workers glanced at him, then quickly looked away. One of the veteran cooks, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl, didn't bother hiding his disapproval. "Still got your job, huh?" he muttered, slamming a pan onto the counter. "Must be nice having connections." Daniel clenched his jaw but stayed silent. He grabbed his apron from the hook and tied it on, ignoring the whispers. The manager, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, clapped her hands. "Listen up, everyone. Owners called a staff meeting in 10. Be ready." A murmur ran through the room. Staff meetings were rare, usually only for big announcements. Daniel's stomach twisted. Was this about him? When the owner walked in, the room fell silent. He stood at the front, hands in his pockets, his expression serious. "I'm sure most of you have heard what happened yesterday," he began, his voice calm but firm. "And I want to make one thing clear, how we treat people in this restaurant, customers and each other, matters." He paused, letting the words sink in. "My mother worked in service jobs her whole life. She knows what it's like to be on her feet all day, dealing with rude customers, scraping by on tips. And yet, she's never once treated anyone the way some of our staff treated her yesterday." Daniel stared at the floor, his face burning. The owner continued. "So starting today, we're making changes. First, every employee, including managers, will retake customer service training. Second, we're implementing a new policy. If a customer can't afford a full meal, they can still sit at a table and order what they can afford. No exceptions." A few servers exchanged surprised glances. One raised a hand. "What if someone just takes up a table for hours and only orders coffee?" The owner's gaze hardened. Then you serve them coffee with a smile. This isn't a luxury hotel, it's a neighborhood restaurant. We don't turn people away because they're poor. The room was dead silent. Finally, the owner said, Daniel will be shadowing Maria for the next 2 weeks. Daniel's head snapped up. Maria was the oldest server on staff, a grandmotherly woman known for her patience with even the rudest customers. Maria gave Daniel a small, knowing smile. He swallowed hard. The first day of shadowing was brutal. Maria moved through her shifts with quiet efficiency, never rushing but never slowing down. She remembered every regular's favorite order, laughed at bad jokes, and somehow managed to calm even the angriest customers with just a few words. And she didn't let Daniel off easy. Watch how I greet table 6, she murmured as they approached a group of teenagers, their table already messy with spilled drinks. They're loud, but they're just kids having fun. Daniel watched as Maria charmed them, even joking about the mess. When they left, they'd not only cleaned up but left her a huge tip. How'd you do that? Daniel asked. Maria wiped down the table. People mirror your energy. If you're annoyed, they'll be worse. If you treat them with respect, most will give it back. Daniel thought about how he'd snapped at the old woman just for ordering soup. At the end of the shift, Maria handed Daniel a worn-out notepad. My first week here, I wrote down every customer complaint and how I fixed it. Read it tonight. Daniel flipped through the pages. Every entry was detailed, not just what went wrong, but why the customer might have been upset in the first place. One note stood out: older gentleman yelled about slow service. Later learned his wife just passed. He's lonely. Next time, extra time at his table. Daniel closed the notebook, a strange lump in his throat. Maria patted his shoulder. This job isn't just about food. It's about people. Remember that. The lunch rush hit hard the next day. A bus full of tourists pulled up unexpectedly, flooding the restaurant with hungry customers all at once. Within minutes, every table was full, the kitchen was backed up, and the noise level rose to a dull roar. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow as he balanced 3 plates through the crowded dining area. Maria had called in sick, leaving him to handle his section alone for the first time since the incident. He could feel the owner watching from the corner office, but he pushed the thought away. Focus. At table 12, a frazzled young mother tried to corral 2 toddlers while scanning the menu. One child knocked over a glass of milk, sending white liquid cascading onto the floor. Daniel's first instinct was to groan, another mess to clean, another delay. But then he remembered Maria's notebook: parents with kids aren't being careless, they're just overwhelmed. He grabbed extra napkins and knelt beside the spill. No worries, accidents happen, he said, flashing the mom a genuine smile. Can I bring some crayons to keep your little ones busy? The woman's shoulders relaxed. You do that? Of course. He cleared the broken glass carefully, then returned moments later with coloring sheets and a small bowl of crackers, Maria's secret weapon for restless kids. As he walked away, he caught the owner nodding approvingly from across the room. The real test came at table 7. A sharply dressed businessman had been waiting longer than usual for his order. He checked his watch aggressively, fingers drumming the tablecloth. Daniel recognized the signs. This was exactly the type of customer who used to make him roll his eyes. Taking a deep breath, he approached. Sir, I want to personally apologize for your wait. The kitchen's backed up, but I'll go check on your meal right now. The man scowled. I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Instead of making excuses, Daniel did something he never would have done before: he got creative. Let me bring you our complimentary bread basket to start, and I'll have the kitchen prioritize your order. If it doesn't come out in 5 minutes, your meal's on me. The man blinked, disarmed by the directness. All right then. Daniel sprinted to the kitchen, pleading with the cooks. Table 7's about to walk out, can we push his salmon through? To his surprise, the head cook, the same one who'd mocked him yesterday, grunted and moved the ticket to the front. Only because you asked nice. The food went out in 4 minutes. The businessman left both a tip and a surprised "thank you" on his way out. That evening, the owner called Daniel into his office. "You handled today well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Especially considering Maria wasn't here to guide you." Daniel stood a little straighter. "I just tried to do what she would have done." The owner studied him for a long moment. "Why?" The question caught Daniel off guard. "Why, what? Why the change? 2 weeks ago, you sneered at an old woman for ordering soup. Today you gave away free crackers to kids and talked down an angry exec. What changed?" Daniel looked down at his shoes, scuffed from the long shift. "I guess. I never thought about how it feels to be on the other side of the counter." A silence stretched between them. Finally, the owner stood. "My mother wants to meet you." Daniel's head jerked up. "What?" "Sunday dinner. 7 p.m. at her house." He slid a handwritten address across the desk. "Don't be late." Sunday evening found Daniel standing nervously on the porch of a modest but well-kept house, clutching a hastily bought bouquet of flowers. He'd spent all morning agonizing over what to wear, finally settling on a clean button-down shirt, the same one he wore to his job interview. The door opened before he could knock. The old woman, Mrs. Rossi, as he now knew her to be, stood smiling in the doorway. She looked different out of her usual dress, wearing comfortable slacks and an apron dusted with flour. The smell of roasting garlic and herbs wafted out behind her. "You came," she said, as if she'd half expected him not to. Come in, come in. The others are already here." Daniel's palms went slick with sweat. Others? The small living room was indeed full of people, mostly older women chatting animatedly around a large dining table. They fell silent as Daniel entered, a dozen pairs of curious eyes turning his way. Mrs. Rossi made quick introductions. "Everyone, this is the young man I told you about. Daniel, these are my friends from the Golden Age Center." A stout woman with silver curls leaned forward. "So you're the rude waiter." Daniel nearly dropped the flowers. But then the women burst into laughter, not mocking, but warm and knowing. Mrs. Rossi took the bouquet from his trembling hands. "Don't mind them. They've been waiting all week to meet you." The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity, with Mrs. Rossi directing Daniel like a seasoned general. "Chop the carrots thinner, dear," she instructed, peering over his shoulder. "Like this." Her hands, though wrinkled, moved with practiced precision. As they worked side by side, Daniel noticed things, the way she hummed old songs under her breath, how she tested the sauce by dipping a spoon and blowing on it carefully before tasting. This was someone who had spent a lifetime feeding people. One of the women called from the dining room. "Tell him about the time at Luigi's, Rosa." Mrs. Rossi chuckled, stirring the simmering pot. "Oh, that was 50 years ago." "Tell it anyway." She glanced at Daniel. "I was 18, working at this terrible diner where the owner made us pay for any mistakes. One night, a customer sent back a steak 3 times, claimed it was too tough." She shook her head. "The 4th time, the cook spit in it before sending it out." Daniel gasped. "That's horrible." Mrs. Rossi's expression turned serious. "I quit that same night. Walked out without my last paycheck. Because food." She tapped the wooden spoon against the pot for emphasis. "Food is about respect. For the ingredients, for the work, for the people eating it." Daniel thought of all the times he'd carelessly dropped plates in the kitchen, or rolled his eyes at picky orders. Dinner was a lively affair, with stories flowing as freely as the wine. Daniel learned that 3 of the women had also been waitresses in their youth. One had worked the night shift at a hospital cafeteria for 30 years. "People think serving is unskilled work," said the silver-curled woman, Marta, as she passed Daniel a basket of bread. "But it takes more brains to handle a hungry crowd than most office jobs." The others nodded vigorously. Mrs. Rossi caught Daniel's eye across the table. "What do you think, Daniel? Now that you've seen both sides?" All conversation stopped as they waited for his answer. Daniel set down his fork carefully. "I think. I had no idea how much I didn't know." The table erupted in approval. Marta clapped him on the back hard enough to make him cough. "Good answer, boy." As Daniel helped clear the plates afterward, Mrs. Rossi pulled him aside. "I want to show you something." She led him to a small hallway lined with framed photos. One showed a much younger version of herself standing proudly beside a grinning boy, no more than 10, in front of a tiny sandwich shop. "My son's first business," she said softly. "He saved allowance for a year to buy that lemonade stand. By 12, he'd talked the corner store into letting him sell sandwiches after school." She touched the glass over the image. "He's always understood that good business starts with treating people right." Daniel stared at the photo, suddenly understanding why the owner had been so furious that day. It wasn't just about disrespecting his mother, it was about disrespecting everything she'd taught him. Mrs. Rossi turned to face Daniel directly. "People will forget what you said, what you did, but never how you made them feel. Remember that, whether you're serving soup or running a company." When Daniel got home that night, he found Maria's notebook still on his kitchen table. He opened it to a fresh page and began writing his own notes, not just about customer service tricks, but about the stories he'd heard tonight. At the top of the page, he wrote in bold letters, "Food is respect." The next morning, Daniel arrived at work an hour early, still buzzing with the energy from Mrs. Rossi's dinner. He found the restaurant unusually quiet, just the head cook, Marco, prepping ingredients in the kitchen. "Morning," Daniel said brightly, tying on his apron. Marco grunted without looking up from his knife work. "You're awfully cheerful for a Monday." Daniel grabbed a spare knife and started helping with the vegetable prep, recalling how Mrs. Rossi had shown him to angle the blade. "Had an interesting weekend. Learned some new tricks." Marco glanced at Daniel's perfectly uniform carrot slices, then raised an eyebrow. "From who? A Michelin chef?" "Better," Daniel grinned. "Someone who's been in the trenches." The cook gave a non-committal hum, but Daniel noticed him adjusting his own technique slightly. The real test came when the rest of the staff trickled in. Jessica, a server who'd been coldest to Daniel since the incident, froze when she saw him reorganizing the condiment station. "What are you doing?" she asked suspiciously. Daniel held up a squeeze bottle. The ketchups were all half empty. "I'm combining them so we don't waste any." Jessica crossed her arms. "Since when do you care about waste?" "Since I realized how much work goes into every bottle," Daniel said simply, remembering Mrs. Rossi's stories about stretching ingredients during lean times. Jessica opened her mouth to retort, but the manager walked in just then, clapping her hands. Team huddle. Big news. The owner stood before the assembled staff, looking more animated than usual. "We're launching a new community program, free meals for seniors every Tuesday afternoon. And..." He paused dramatically, "we're putting Daniel in charge of it." A murmur ran through the room. Daniel's mouth fell open. Jessica's hand shot up. "Why him? He's the newest server." The owner's gaze didn't waver. "Because he's the only one who's spent time learning from the people we're trying to serve." He turned to Daniel. "Well? You up for it?" Daniel's mind raced. He thought of Mrs. Rossi's friends, their stories, their humor, their dignity. "Yes, sir. But I'll need help." His eyes found Jessica. "Especially from people who know the regulars better than I do." Jessica looked startled, then grudgingly nodded. The first Senior Tuesday was chaos. 20 elderly guests arrived at once, some with walkers, others with grandchildren in tow. Daniel had planned for 15. The kitchen got backed up, coffee spilled, and one gentleman insisted his meatloaf wasn't as good as his late wife's, though he ate 3 helpings anyway. But something magical happened too. Jessica, who'd been drafted to help, found herself charmed by a feisty 92-year-old who'd been a rockette in the 1940s. Marco came out of the kitchen to personally apologize for an overcooked steak, and stayed to listen to war stories from a Vietnam vet. Daniel moved between tables, refilling drinks, fetching extra napkins, and most importantly, listening. Really listening. He noticed how Mrs. Chen's hands shook too badly to pour her own tea. How Mr. Henderson pretended not to need help cutting his meat, but sighed in relief when Daniel offered. At one point, he caught the owner watching from the doorway, a small smile on his face. After the last guest left, exhausted but happy, the staff collapsed at a back table. Even Jessica was smiling as she counted out generous tips. Many of the seniors had insisted on paying despite the free meal promise. That wasn't terrible, she admitted, stretching her arms. Marco plopped down with a groan. My feet feel like they've been through a meat grinder. Daniel slid a plate of leftover desserts toward them. But did you see Mrs. Petrovsky's face when you brought out her pierogies just like her mother used to make? The cook actually smiled. Yeah, that was, all right. It wasn't a parade or a medal, but in that moment, with his co-workers laughing over shared battle stories, Daniel felt something he'd never expected, pride in being part of this messy, exhausting, wonderful restaurant family. As Daniel was leaving that night, the owner stopped him at the door. Walk with me. They strolled down the quiet street, the neon restaurant sign fading behind them. You did good today, the owner said finally. Daniel shook his head. It was a team effort. The older man chuckled. See, that right there? That's why I'm promoting you to assistant manager next month. Daniel nearly tripped over his own feet. What? But You've earned it, the owner cut in. More importantly, you've changed. And that's rarer than any natural-born talent. They walked in silence for a block before Daniel found his voice. Your mother, she really opened my eyes. The owner smiled softly. She has a way of doing that. He stopped outside a small apartment building. This is me. Think about the promotion. And Daniel? Yeah. Next Sunday, wear something comfortable. Mom's making lasagna. Daniel stood frozen in the empty restaurant, the owner's words about the promotion still ringing in his ears. Assistant manager. Him. The same guy who'd sneered at an elderly woman over soup just weeks ago. His phone buzzed, a text from Jessica, "Congrats, boss. Don't make me regret saying that." He smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't dream of it. Senior Tuesday needs you." As he turned to leave, a crash echoed from the kitchen. Daniel rushed back to find Marco kneeling amid shattered plates, his face ashen. It's gone, the cook muttered. What's gone? Marco pointed to the walk-in fridge. The lock hung broken, the door slightly ajar. Daniel's stomach dropped as he peered inside, all their fresh ingredients for the week, spoiled. Milk curdled, meat turning gray, vegetables wilting in the unnatural warmth. Someone had tampered with the temperature controls. The cook's hands shook with rage. We can't serve this. Tomorrow's fully booked, anniversary parties, that big law firm luncheon. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just sabotage, it was an attempt to destroy the restaurant's reputation. His eyes fell on a slip of paper taped to the fridge door, "Know your place, traitor." The owner arrived within minutes, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. Call the suppliers. See what they can rush deliver by morning. Daniel dialed frantically while Marco tried salvage operations. One by one, the answers came back: no, impossible, maybe by Wednesday. Jessica arrived unexpectedly, still in her street clothes. Heard what happened? I've got cousins at the farmer's market, they'll open early for us. The owner nodded gratefully. Take Daniel with you. Marco, start prepping what we can. I'll handle the refund calls. As they hurried out, Daniel caught the owner staring at the ruined food, his shoulders slumped in a way Daniel had never seen before. The pre-dawn market was a blur of haggling and hurried loading. Jessica's cousins came through, crates of fresh produce, bread still warm from overnight baking. But the meat vendor shook his head. No good cuts left, boys. Just stew meat and bones. Daniel's phone rang, Marco, sounding frantic. Health inspectors here early. Someone must have tipped them off. Jessica paled. This was planned. Someone really wants us to fail. Daniel thought of the note, the perfect timing. Only someone who knew the restaurant schedule could have orchestrated this. His stomach twisted as a terrible suspicion formed. Back at the restaurant, the health inspector was finishing her report. You're cleared to open, but I'll need to re-inspect the... Wait. Daniel's voice cut through the tension. He held up the tampered thermostat. This wasn't just an accident. Someone deliberately. The owner gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Daniel fell silent. Once the inspector left, Marco exploded. Why didn't you let him tell her? This was sabotage. The owner's voice was quiet but firm. Because airing dirty laundry won't feed today's customers. Now let's get creative with what we have. The lunch menu became, chef's surprise, simple, hearty dishes built around their limited ingredients. Marco transformed tough cuts into rich ragus. Daniel and Jessica explained the special market fresh menu with such enthusiasm that customers felt privileged rather than disappointed. During a brief lull, Daniel cornered the owner in the office. You know who did this, don't you? The older man sighed. I have suspicions. But without proof. Steve, Daniel said flatly, recalling the former assistant manager who'd been demoted after the new policies were implemented. He's been bitter ever since. A crash from the dining room interrupted them. They rushed out to find Steve standing amid overturned chairs, his face twisted with rage. Happy now? Your precious community restaurant is a joke. Customers stared in shocked silence. Daniel stepped forward. We're doing just fine, actually. In fact, he gestured to the packed dining room, business is better than ever. Steve's eyes darted to the owner. You'll regret choosing this nobody over me. He stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the plates. That evening, as the exhausted staff celebrated their improbable success, Mrs. Rossi arrived unexpectedly. She surveyed the tired but triumphant team with a knowing smile. I hear today was quite the adventure, she said, setting a massive lasagna on the counter. Daniel helped her to a chair. We managed. But Steve. She patted his hand. Every restaurant has its Steves. The important thing is how you handle them. She turned to her son. And how will you? The owner exchanged a long look with Daniel. We'll handle it together. That's what assistant managers are for. Mrs. Rossi beamed. Good answer. She began serving lasagna to the stunned but grateful staff. Now eat. Tomorrow's another day. Epilogue, 1 month later. The Senior Tuesday program had tripled in size. Jessica had taken over its coordination with pride. Marco's Market Specials became the restaurant's most popular menu. And Steve? After a very frank discussion with the owner, and a restraining order, he'd moved to another city. Daniel stood at the host stand, now bearing an assistant manager nameplate, greeting customers with genuine warmth. The elderly woman from that fateful day walked in, leaning on her son's arm. "Table for two?" Daniel asked with a smile. The woman's eyes twinkled. "Just soup and bread today, dear." Daniel didn't miss a beat. "Coming right up. And the bread's fresh from Jessica's cousin's bakery, you'll love it." As he walked toward the kitchen, he caught the owner giving him an approving nod. Behind him, he heard the woman say softly to her son, "You chose well." And for the first time in his life, Daniel knew exactly where he belonged.